There she is, Leanna Harris, the mom of little Cooper Harris and the wife of Ross Harris. We're finding out brand new information. She has now hired a lawyer. And let's face it, there's been a lot of question, a lot of speculation concerning things she said, her behavior in and around this. So we're going to talk to our experts about that. Again, we know the story, and it's a terrible one. And the headline gets you. Hot car death. 22-month-old Cooper Harris left in his car, and he died. And his dad, Ross, is charged with murdering his son, and many have wondered whether or not Leanna Harris had anything to do with it. Again, and it's been pointed out, she has not been arrested, she is not a suspect, and she is, though, part of the investigation, obviously being so close to this case. So let's bring in Philip Holloway. He's an attorney and has followed this so closely. Not surprising, right? With all the speculation in and around her that she would get herself a lawyer at this point.
Well, if you take it all in context, you know, she made some statements at the funeral that certainly raised some eyebrows, and the testimony from the preliminary hearing about some statements that she allegedly made with her husband when they were in a police interview room, seemingly not knowing that they were being recorded. Those have all, at minimum, raised eyebrows, and it doesn't surprise me that under the circumstances she's seeking the advice of counsel, because that's what you really would want to do anytime there's even the possibility, even if it's remote, that you might be charged with a crime.
There you go. Well, you just mentioned it, and it was part of those details that came out of Thursday's probable cause hearing that were jaw-dropping. Some of the things she said. First thing she says to folks at daycare, right. Ross must have left him in the car, and then police saying a conversation between Leanna and Ross, and she says, "You didn't say too much," so here it is. Let's listen.
And in front of several witnesses, all of a sudden she states, Ross must have left him in the car. And they're like, what? There's no other reason. Ross must have, no other explanation, excuse me. Ross must have left him in the car. And they try to console her, and they're like, no, you know, there's 1,000 reasons. There, you know, he could have taken him to lunch or something. We don't know yet. And she's like, no.
Did his wife ever say anything to him about what he said to police?
And she asked him, she had him sit down, and he starts going through this, and she looks at him, she's like, well, did you say too much?
All right, Philip, if you're the attorney hired by Leanna Harris, are you asking for clarification of things like that she has said?
Right. We're going to need to know the entire context of what she said. Who did she say it to? What were her exact words? What you saw at the preliminary hearing was only a summary, if you will, and even a subjective interpretation, perhaps, of what she said. So we want to know who she said it to, what precisely was said, were there other witnesses, and in what context. There
you go. And again, we're going over the facts of this case, what we've heard. You guys have been reacting as we continue to share this story. One other thing we heard at that probable cause hearing, Philip, and this is, I guess, relayed to us from Detective Stoddard, is a conversation. It's a phone call from Leanna's mom, her mom, so the grandmother of little Cooper, and she's hysterical to find out little Cooper's gone, and zero emotion from Leanna as she talks to her own mother. Let's listen to that.
She just started screaming. And she's like, what do you mean Cooper's no longer here? What do you mean? And during this conversation, with all this emotion coming out, she's asked Leanne, they can hear this.
Who's the emotion coming from?
The emotion's coming from her mom, or who she identified as her mom. And during this, she's like, why aren't you crying? Why aren't you reacting to this?
And what did Leanna say?
She said, I must be in shock.
It's comments like that. Even her courtroom behavior, which we see here, she's just chewing gum as she's hearing details of her son's death that are curious, to say the least.
Curious, to say the least. That's exactly right, Mike. You know, again, we don't know how we would act if we were in that same situation. Every one of us who is a parent, you know, if we're faced with something like this, who knows how we would act? Everybody's got in their mind some preconceived notion of how somebody's supposed to act, but I think until you actually find yourself in that tragic circumstance, you really don't know how you would react.
Yeah. All right, very good. That's, again, obviously, that's new information we're finding out. But we're also finding out about what Cobb County investigators did. They had the exact car, that Hyundai Tucson that little Cooper was found dead in, and his car seats, and they basically recreated the hot conditions as the little guy died. My colleague from CNN, Victor Blackwell, has more on that.
In this video from WAGA, we see Justin Ross Harris's SUV in the employee lot at Home Depot on a hot, sunny day in the same space where he parked it 3 weeks prior. And in the back, the very car seat Cooper was strapped into for 7 hours. Joseph Scott Morgan is a forensic scholar and former investigator.
And I think that it paints a really graphic picture for us as the public to get an idea what this child went through and how horrific this death was.
In the video, investigators with the district attorney's office are seen testing the temperature several times. At 9:30, about the time police say Harris pulled into the parking lot and left his toddler strapped in the back seat. At 12:42, when police say Harris returned to place light bulbs in the car. And at 4:16, the end of the workday, when detectives say Harris got in and drove off.
Again, fascinating on an investigative front, but again, chilling to know what this little guy went through. Victor joins us now. And Victor, before we talk any more about that investigation, that recreation, you got brand new information about toxicology
still warm
reports.
off the printer from the Cobb County Police Department. They've received the results back from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, negative as it relates to the toxicology report from little Cooper's autopsy. So nothing inside his system, no Benadryl, nothing nefarious, no toxins found there that would have indicated that he was drugged or doped up or anything. So the question still remains, no indication there that this was intentional. Question is, was it murder? Was it an accident?
Yeah, that is the question right now. Let's get back to that recreation and other aspects of the investigation. What else is going on right now? They're checking his computer, talking about Ross Harris, right?
Yeah, they're checking his computer, and they're also going through what we found, at least a half dozen social media profiles as it relates to, we talked about the Scout profile, where he's RJ, 27 years old. We know he's 33 there. There's also the photo stream. There's Flickr. There's the Reddit account, where he has all of these, and we know he's a computer guy, has all of these accounts. They're looking for any hints there or any suggestions that this was something that was premeditated.
There you go. And on that point about the internet searches and this Scout.com profile is RJ and call me or something like contact me, I'm harmless. I'm paraphrasing here. How damning is that? Court of public opinion, very damning. What about in a court of law?
Well, it all depends on whether or not they can link this in any way to the death of the child. That's the key. If it's totally unrelated, then it means nothing, and it's irrelevant to the case. On the other hand, if it turns out that there's sufficient evidence that this was something intentional, it all becomes part of the motive. And it shows perhaps that he's leading a double life, and maybe he wants to have a life without a child.
There you go. Any more on a timeline as far as, looking at computer, thumb drives, things like that? I know we kind of heard 10 days. Is that about what we're looking at here before we get any new information?
Well, it depends upon what they find, if that leads them in another direction to find another phone or another iPad or another laptop. But we know that they're continuing to look through this phase, and the clock is ticking for that indictment. At some point, you've got 90 days to either indict him or he gets bond. Whether they give it to him or not, I think that's right, yeah.
Right. What it is, if he doesn't get indicted within 90 days, he's automatically entitled to a bond. But the thing that you got to remember is that the judge at the preliminary hearing decided that he did not meet the legal criteria to be eligible for bond. So the judge is going to have to consider those very same criteria if he's in the position of having to grant a bond, so you can expect one to be very high. He's not entitled to a bond that he can make. It could be $5 million cash.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Phil, thank you. Victor, thank you. Is this our colleagues at CNN, us ourselves, we're all staying on top of this. Any new developments? Obviously, the new development today, besides the toxicology reports negative, Leanna Harris now has a lawyer, so we're following every aspect of this.